Hello there, product people. Welcome to the show that supercharges your abilities to become better thinkers, makers, and leaders. I'm your host, Alsawi, and I'm thrilled to have you join me for this exciting episode of Product People. In this episode, we explore how to think, not just what to think. We discuss design's role in aligning business and user goals and the roots of morality in work environments. We also touch on the role of designers as therapists, the privacy fallout of AI apps, the thread connecting trust and transparency, the broader impact of AI on humanity, and the future skills needed to stay relevant. And lastly, we talk about the rising premium on being human, the cognitive mess of AI slop, and the loud return of feature-centricity. So if you're a designer, engineer, product professional, or simply someone interested in understanding how to build tech with a moral compass, you're in the right place. As always, you can expect an open conversation, valuable insights, and meaningful advice that can fuel your own journey with product, design, and leadership. Let's dive right in. Today, I'm joined by a design practitioner, tech leader, founder, podcast host, and published researcher. He's the founder and principal consultant of Impact, a strategic product design firm known for helping enterprise organizations bring software products to market 50% faster. With over 2 decades of experience and a deep foundation in robotics and electrical engineering, he blends analytical rigor with user-centered design to transform chaotic development into predictable success. He's also a published researcher and the host of the Make an Impact podcast, where he brings stories from AI integration, UX strategy, and real-world product design to life, bridging the gap between technical feasibility and business impact. When he's not working, he enjoys traveling with his family and training in Jiu-Jitsu and Muay Thai with his son. Without further ado, let's welcome Makoto Kern to the Product People podcast. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, wow. Thanks for having me. I don't know if I'm the right person to be on the show.
I'm sure you are. Thank you for coming. And I'd love to always start by hearing your personal story with design. Can you walk us through your journey? How did you get started? And perhaps what led your evolution to where you are today?
Definitely. Yeah, as you mentioned, I started out about 20 plus years ago. I was an electrical engineer, robotics. I did that for about a decade. I've always had the interest of taking things apart, looking at how things work. But I also loved entrepreneurship, and always throughout after I graduated, I was always reading entrepreneur magazines and just wanted to know how I love hearing those stories and always try to find something that I enjoyed. And, as I was in my final stages of my engineering career, that's kind of when the .com boom was happening. And I was basically creating websites for friends and family. I was looking on Craigslist, found one of my biggest customers, my first customers on Craigslist, which was very interesting. It was actually Turtle Wax. It was like a Flash interactive garage, and they were trying to sell one of their sister products online. And yeah, got that gig. But I just remember constantly hustling as I was driving in Chicago, because that's where I grew up in the south suburbs of Chicago. I would drive through traffic, make calls to clients, after work, during lunch. And, as I was doing kind of my final stages in robotics, a lot of the work that I was doing is basically lean manufacturing. And so we were always trying to integrate automation, semi-automation with people on the manufacturing floor. And so a lot of software was built by engineers for engineers, but not really for the people on the manufacturing floor who weren't very technical. And so my job was to really make it efficient, because if somebody ships a widget, 1,000 widgets, and they didn't catch something on the screen, then now you have to rework all those widgets. And so, it kind of naturally led me to really understand the user experience of software. Mm-hmm. And then, with the websites, that was always a thing where I had to really learn how, what got people to click. And so I got to a point where I'm like, okay, I could quit my job. I got a pretty big consulting gig, and I was having a lot of side projects as well. And then from there, just started my journey I went to work for a lot of different agencies as far as consulting, just had constant projects coming in. And we grew our business a lot in Texas. I moved to Texas about 8 years ago. And that's kind of where the business exploded, did a lot of enterprise software. And since then, just been helping, companies in all different industries. So it's been a wonderful journey.
Was there a cultural change in terms of works and the type of clients that you started having after your move? What was the biggest insight that you had around working still with clients in the consulting space, but moving states?
I think the biggest one was, in Chicago, it's such a big industry, and there's a lot of agencies. There's lots of kind of Fortune 500 companies as well downtown. So I was really working with like Walgreens. We had clients that were State Farm, Allstate, like in big insurance companies, and really trying to enhance the B2C type of work, which was great because we know that B2C, the cognitive psychology around that is so important for users. And I did a lot of UX research. I did that for a year where I'm just constantly just testing designs with people. And so I really honed my skill from a UX researcher perspective and really understanding just not making things look good, but actually why people click and making them click was so important. But then when I made the move and started getting clients, we started getting into more of the enterprise space. And one of our biggest clients today is over 10 years now, and they're in the energy space. And they basically, with enterprise software, B2C or B2B2B, it's different. And the way you approach it is different. And, how people are sitting there, they've done a workflow, they've been in the industry for 10 years or however long, you create a new software for them, you disrupt their workflow. So we, just understanding that kind of switch to how enterprise people work versus consumers work through their application was really, it's really interesting to see that difference.
I want to get into your thinking process.
Yeah.
I think it's important, as we kind of speak about the hype around Gen AI and some of the real use cases. One of the things that I think becomes very valuable is how people think. And there's always a premium around how you dissect something. How do you sense make? What kind of methodology do you use? What kind of questions do you ask? And I think that's best demonstrated through an example. So we can get to know you, understand your thinking process. Let's take something like a client request. Let's call it a one statement or a one-liner brief. And if I was to come to you as a client and ask in the B2B space, which I think is very relevant to what you just said. Mm-hmm. And hypothetically, I'm asking for your help as an agency or as a consultancy to help me build or create a platform that would enhance my understanding and improve my employees' experience in real time. So I want to understand how what struggles do they have on a daily basis? How are they feeling? And perhaps it might give me some insights on how do I make this better. So it's less about the example, it's more about your methodology and your approach. With an ask like this, what's your process? What's your methodology? Mm-hmm. And if you can kind of highlight our core part of the discussion around how do you make that ethical, moral decision-making within your flow and the process? How do you dissect something like this? Walk us through what goes in your mind. What kind of questions would you ask? And tell us how might you build the right tech for such an ask by applying or by bringing your moral compass to the conversation.
I would just jump right into wireframes, high fidelity. I'm just kidding. That's but we know that's a lot of times the ask, and usually that's the biggest problem, where a lot of people want to just jump right into wireframes thinking they'll just shortcut their way to the solution, and that causes a lot of issues. No, seriously though, our methodology, and this is something that we've really pushed, and I've always done since I was wireframing, is that you could be super hyper focused on the user, which is great, but if that's the only thing you're focused on, your scalability and your kind of narrow-mindedness in this sense is going to be hindered, because the way I approach it is always through first the leadership and the business goals and objectives. What are you trying to do as a business? And what are those kind of like KPIs and the high level goals? Because ultimately, who's ever making the decision, they're going to change it to whatever they want, but you can mitigate a lot of that by fostering communication, fostering decision-making in front of everybody. And unless you're like maybe Amazon or Google, most companies don't know how to communicate within their organization. There's so much assumptions are made. And when you get in there, you can realize that people have different assumptions of what actually they need to do. And as a designer, that becomes very problematic, because if we're jumping from SME to product owner to director to VP to CEO, we may be churning our designs multiple times. And so your results are going to change. You're going to get frustrated and you're going to end up like, okay, I'm going to a different company. So what we generally do is we try to understand, again, like the business goals and objectives, and then let's pinpoint with the leaders in the room to say, hey, is this correct? Is this right? Because then after you do that, what we try to understand is then, okay, we got that part. So now let's make you all empathetic to actually what the user's problems are, their objectives, what their flow is, their pain points, and let's understand that together. And so once we get an understanding of that, so if we're building this app, we're figuring out the user's journey. We don't use personas, we use archetypes. Because a lot of times personas, you can have hundreds of them. But if you have an archetype, it's a little bit more higher level and encompasses more of a group. And so, once we have that mapped and an understanding of that, especially with leadership, then you start to understand, okay, let's build that feature map. Let's understand like kind of where the features lie, like what are high value, high risk versus low value, low risk, and kind of put that in a quadrant and kind of understand, okay, these are things that we understand and we know and we have to have. These are table stakes that we know that we have to have in the application in order for it to that's the status quo, versus stuff that we don't need at all, versus stuff that we know that are really high value for the user, but we're not sure and it's risky because it's going to take a lot of effort to create. So let's get into user research. Let's prototype those things. Then we reduce that risk, which is, that's a big thing when it comes to features, because a lot of times you'll get into an organization and they've already created something like, and this is getting into AI a little bit, and I won't go too deep, but it's a feature. And if you spend a lot of time and a lot of effort to create that feature and nobody uses it, or nobody uses it in the way you want, well, you just wasted all that time. And, if it's an internal app, it may not be as detrimental. But if you're competing, especially in this day and age of AI where people can prompt their way faster than you can almost develop it and compete against you, then you're going to have to make sure you've got speed, you've got direction, and you got constant improvements. Otherwise, your competitors are going to just surpass you because they're all using AI as well. So that constant of getting business alignment, seeing what the users are doing, seeing their goals, and then creating that feature map, and then creating a 6 to 12 month kind of roadmap of discovery and delivery. So then developers are involved. They can see what's coming down the pipe and they can say, hey, look, okay, we can do this. And we just want to let you know this component is going to take 100 hours, but can we do it this way? Because so many times, the executive team is like, okay, we've got the wireframes. Thanks a lot. It's like, that's not how we work. We don't throw things over the fence, because when it gets to development, you're going to guarantee at least 25% of that is going to have to be changed, or there's constraints in the development system. And this is what I think is really important, because you'll get these big organizations that will come in and blue sky these great ideas. Developers will get to it and say, oh my God, we can't do this in a year. This is going to take us 4 or 5 years to create, and lots of money. We got to change the tech stack, blah, blah, blah. And so having those constraints and understanding that and working with the development team through execution is so important. And so that's kind of like a high level of how I would approach this kind of problem.
Okay. You mentioned a lot of things. You started off by describing how important it is to align with the leadership of the organization around the business goals, the objectives. You covered core elements around research, modeling users. I like your point about archetypes, and I have to agree with a lot of the things that you said there. Problem definition, prioritization. You also kind of spoke about risk reduction and mitigation, building a roadmap, and eventually building. Now, let's take a step back in a way and think about motivations for a second. So business leaders will have their objectives. Sometimes they can't articulate it that well, but as a design partner, you help them articulate their objectives and state them. Was there a time where you don't necessarily align with the motivation of the objectives? Meaning a time where you had to walk away from a client?
I've never had to walk away from a client per se, because I think part of our job, and this is kind of where, everybody loves to design, and that's the fun part of the job. It's the dealing with the people's personalities, especially when you get to leadership, the egos and how you approach it. And being a consultant too, you don't want to be an order taker. You have to recommend and be strong in your convictions and be a salesperson almost. And so throughout my years, yes, I probably have folded and just been like, okay, we'll do whatever you want in my early career. But as now I feel like I'm more of a veteran since I've been doing it for a longer time, and I'm more confident in how and what I recommend to the clients. And again, like, design isn't a one-time thing. It's a continuous improvement. It's a continuous iterations. And so we try to always align, like, okay, how does this app or this feature you're trying to do, how's it relate to the business objectives? Does it hit that? Does it hit those KPIs and OKRs? If it doesn't, then you're changing the direction, and you have to give us a reason why, and a valid reason why, in front of everybody. And so, if you've got the leadership that is really just non-communicative, you're going to have to change and champion that way of thinking. And that's kind of that's what separates us, is that we're almost like therapists in a sense, where we get those people to talk. We get them to understand and show, like, this is a better process than you kind of like throwing a monkey wrench in the system and just deciding this is what I want because this is why I want it. But if you tie it back to what we all agreed upon and why it's that way, and if for whatever reason, and I don't think I've been in that position, because at that point we were usually able to come to some kind of compromise if they're really convicted about something. But it's the metrics, because we know design is subjective. Everybody in the room becomes a designer. So you have to take that objective, or take the subjective and make it objective. And the way you do that is through metrics. And you just it's all data driven. And so you have to test it. And now with so many testing tools, you can A/B test things. You could put it out in the wild, get that feedback and say, you have your opinion, but this is what the data is. If you want to increase your revenue by 25%, sure, your idea looks better from a UI perspective or whatever the case is, but from a revenue perspective, this one increased conversion rate by 20% or 25% just in a short period of time. Is that less important for you? Because the data shows that it is. So that's kind of how we, you have to approach those situations.
I want to get into more of the morality question, the idea that you might have well-defined business objectives and goals. You can be objective about it. You can achieve your goals, but is it the right experience? Is it the right thing to do type of question that I'm, trying to unpack, especially with the role of tech and a lot of the conversations that we see now around ethical tech and the motivations behind some of the decisions that we see, even with big companies. So I guess where I'm going with this is, where do you think our morality as product and design leaders should come from? When is it okay, or when is it the right thing to do to tell your client, what, this is not an ethical product that I'm going to build. Here's the reasons why. And I can't really work with you. Or yes, you'll hit your objectives, but you're going to create millions of addicts to this new app that you're creating and can't work on it because of these reasons or whatever. So I'm trying to kind of differentiate between, the dilemma around building the right thing versus building things right.
Yeah.
And I want to get your thoughts around that, perhaps through an example or something that you've seen in the industry where you think to yourself, why would anybody build this? Or is it a question of money and metrics?
Yeah. So when it comes to the ethics, now there's a difference between your political opinions versus ethics. And so if a company's, doing something that's, for or against your political thing, that's a different story. But when it comes to like ethics, where you're invading people's privacy, or you're creating something that's hyper addicting, or you do a lot of UX dark patterns, it's going to be, what's the one movie where everybody has a price. And everybody, if you're at a startup and the startup is, I'm sure, like, let's say you're Tinder or OnlyFans or something like that, and you were at the starting, kind of at the beginning there, you are now a multimillionaire probably just being a designer. And so those kind of aspirations really can push on people's ethics. And then, obviously you could justify that by saying, well, let me make my millions and then I'll be ethical afterwards. And I'll use that for good.
There's a guarantee that you're going to live until that point, but yes.
Yeah. So it's that line. Are you crossing? I mean, there's obviously people who don't care about that. And so, like, look, I see what you're trying to do here and it's just wrong. And let's not do that. I mean, I've always wanted to try to do, I have children. Anything that has any kind of child exploitation, I would love to like be a part of something like that. To me, that's something that would be like a passion project type of thing. But with like conversion rates for B2C consumers, the enterprise, you're not going to see it so much. But with consumer based products, that's where you're going to see the boundaries getting pushed. And especially now with AI, the biggest problems are privacy and the gaps that it's creating. People are able to vibe code apps like crazy, but the ability to hack those right now is so easy because, yeah, you just get an AI to hack those things as well. And, I have cybersecurity clients and they are just licking their lips, just waiting for all these vibe coded apps to be released because you know what? You vibe code something very quickly. You've got somebody steals your customer's data. Guess what? You're going to see probably a lawsuit and you're going to be out of business very quickly, just as quickly as you spun it up. So, you have to, as a designer, kind of understand what boundaries you're pushing, especially from a consumer perspective. Because, yeah, you want people to click, you want people to buy. That's the ultimate way of doing it. But we absolutely hate when somebody tries to hide that cancel button for the SaaS membership. You're like, how do I cancel this thing?
Mm-hmm.
But you have a respect for a company that says, hey, look, your membership's coming up. Do you want to renew? If not, just hit this cancel. When you make it frictionless like that, I don't know what the actual like ethics versus like revenue difference that is versus trying to hide something. And so it'd be interesting to see that. Luckily, I've never been put in a position where I'm pushing those boundaries. I've always, you always want to try to get people to click. How do you do that? Changing the buttons, social proof, constraint, any type of scarcity, things like that. The normal kind of social things that you do from a sales perspective, which generally isn't too, it's not unethical, but like, taking people's data and how much you're taking. Luckily, there's regulations around that. And if you're an e-commerce company, they're getting stricter about those things and what's being taken. But with AI, I don't know where that like kind of that gray area is, because now are you building on top of ChatGPT? You're building a wrapper. Sure, you're not taking it, but maybe they are taking it, and you don't know how much is being taken. If you're getting into the medical field or any type of like health app, then yeah, you better be sure that you're not taking that data, because it's going to come back to bite you if you don't. So I think that's just, when you're building something or designing something, make sure what you're doing in that user's journey is transparent. Because if you're building a brand and you're showing transparency with price, showing transparency about how, what's being done, I think that just builds trust, especially if you're trying to not be the cheapest, but you're trying to be the best. You have to show that, because people are going to gravitate towards usually the price. But I mean, I have a client that's, one of the top electrical companies, and, my job is to increase conversion rates, but they're expensive. And so what do you do? And I've always said, you have to build trust, because we can try to do whatever we want with the price, but bottom line is people are going to figure that out if that's important for them. So trying to hide it through different, we're trying to make them calculate what their monthly cost would be, then yeah, that's fine, but people are going to figure that out. It's not that hard. So why not just show it, be transparent about it, and make it very easy for them. So they're like, you know what, I'm going with this company because it's a no-brainer. It's frictionless for me. So there is some trade-offs in that respect, and it may actually hurt you more in the end than help you.
You mentioned authenticity, and I think as we kind of get into more conversations around the impact of AI and authenticity, maybe I'll get a chance to unpack that a little bit more. So we're going to take a short break, and when we're back, I'll be asking you questions around your own podcast and perhaps your boldest prediction on the impact of AI on humanity. Hey there, my amazing product people. If you're trying to find your own story with product, design, and leadership, gain a new perspective on being human in a soulless corporate world, and possibly have a good laugh in the process, you can grab your very own copy of my latest book, Product People, A Journal of Laughter and Tears. It's available on Amazon in all formats right now. Happy reading. All right, let's continue where we left off. I wanted to ask you about your own podcast, Make an Impact, where you discuss real stories related to AI integration, UX, and product strategy. And my question is really around what is the boldest prediction made on your show regarding the impact of AI on humanity?
Yeah, with our podcast, it's blown up over the past few months. And I think we went from a few hundred subscribers to now we're at 42,000, which is just mind boggling to me how fast we've blown up. But one of our episodes that went viral, and this is something that I knew would probably be very important, especially as a parent. My son's he's 17, he's trying to decide, like, should he go to school or university? And we're trying to figure out, like, what should he study? And he's not super technical, but very intelligent kid. And he's in music, a band. And I'm like, being a rock star is a very hard dream, but I'll support him 100%. But I've always told him to be like, really, really just think about like networking, business. And, I got him in wireframing and design and learning Figma and all that so he can develop flyers. But, having that conversation with him to try to understand, like, what should you do for a college degree? This is why one of our one episode, I think, went pretty viral. There's definitely topics on there that we discuss where it's like there's a job apocalypse that could be coming right now, and it is. And what degrees do you go into if you even go to college because of AI? Because I'm hearing stories where, people even from top universities, and I've got a lot of friends who have their own businesses. They said, well, I went to some of the top universities and just the graduates are just not employable. They've got very high expectations for salary, but their experience is zero and they just can't just hit the ground running. And then now with AI, you're almost making like the introductory business like roles almost obsolete because AI can take over that. And so it's like, you have to understand, like, what do we get into? And so on the podcast, we get into the ideas of like, what is an important kind of, do you go into college? Do you study university? Do you study the traditional things? And that's my son is still trying to figure out. He went into, he's just doing business entrepreneurship because it comes down to, like, you have to be, a jack of all trades in a sense, but you have to be, we've always thought of thinking about that T formation where you're very deep in one expertise but you still have a broad width. UX designers is just a good part of that. You're a great visual designer, you're great at UX research, but you understand the different aspects of design. And so with your trying to decide on what college degree to go for, it's such a big thing now, especially in the United States where it's so expensive to get a college degree. So when you graduate, you're in massive debt if you have to pay for it out of pocket. And, if you're going to be technical, go for it. If you love programming, you love all that stuff, go for those technical degrees still. There's still going to be a need for that. And I still think, this is another thing that's interesting about the YouTube algorithm is that, when one episode kind of blows up and goes viral, then they start to trickle down to other episodes. And so, the other episodes that we're thinking about is like, okay, well, is this a real threat, AI? Or is this a .com boom bust kind of situation where we're seeing anybody with AI in their application is now getting these massive evaluations. Their revenue doesn't back it up. And so this was another podcast that kind of went viral on top of that one, because it's like you're seeing the same similarities, because I was in the .com boom and bust as well. And I just remember everybody just wanted, websites. If you built a website, you put a .com, oh my God, you're going to make millions. Give me an eBay, Craigslist, MySpace, hybrid app, and we're going to make millions. It's almost the same thing here where you're seeing with AI, people are getting insane salaries. And you're going to get like, hey, let's put AI into our application and we're going to make a ton of money. And it's getting to a point where everything's not getting to, it seems like it's being overvalued and there's a bubble that's forming. And so it's like, well, what do I do now? What do I get into? And I've always told my kids, every time when I see them working, I encourage them to utilize AI to a certain point, because this is going to get into another podcast episode that we're releasing pretty soon. But it's like, what schools have been doing the same type of teaching for the last few decades. They're not keeping up with AI and the technology. And so they're falling behind. And you can't create somebody who's going to be valuable in this workforce if you don't encourage that use of technology. You're not going to have, if you have Microsoft, when the computers came out, if you didn't teach kids how to use those computers by the time they graduated and they've only used an abacus or a calculator, they're not going to be as valuable. So the same thing goes for here with AI, is that you have to encourage usage of it. It has to help you. So then you could focus on stuff that you actually have an interest in. And so that's kind of where, the podcast is really interesting, where we can approach those subjects, take it from what, our stories and what we've seen, and then, engage with the audience. And it seemed like those topics right now are at the top of mind of a lot of parents and people.
I'd love to get your perhaps first definition of what an AI agent is and the applications of agents acting with a level of independence, and how might we govern that in the future?
So, we test out a lot of the different AI tools out there. And one of the interesting things that I've seen, I don't know if you've heard of Manus. Manus is more of that AI agent versus like ChatGPT and other things. And it's interesting to see, and this goes into a story where I was actually helping my son with a volunteer work that he was doing, where it was with the Smithsonian. And they have these 1800s, back in the 1800s, they had this really cursive type of documentation that they have scans of. And as a volunteer, you can kind of go in and you've got different levels of difficulty. And I had to teach him how to do cursive. What does it mean? It was even hard for me to decipher because it's very intricate. And, he went through his volunteer work, and I said, hey, why don't we try this with AI and just see how well it works? And we're testing all the systems, ChatGPT and Claude and everything. And they were just getting maybe less than 1% right. But then we used Manus, and Manus is more that agent. And it's interesting where it got about 60% correct after we trained it. And then we were able to train it. We did some training methodologies that I was teaching him, and was able to get about 75% right, which is massive. And just seeing the difference, because that is more of an agent. They actually go out and do things, and sometimes they brute force, they do whatever to get the results. And so, when we're creating these type of agents that are very specific for a certain task, you can see the power of how that works versus just kind of a general, like, Claude or ChatGPT application or tool. And so, this is where you hear the stories of like, oh, there's going to be this is going to be the first time in history where we're going to have, a one-person billionaire or $1 billion company, because they're running a marketing agent, a sales agent, a development agent, AI agent. And at the moment, there's agents, especially with sales. If you're doing cold outreach, yes, you can create AI agents to help you to do those things. But for that example, I use it myself, and I see the quality, and I see when I'm getting contacted through an AI agent and the quality goes down. And I'm able to recognize that. And same thing when you're trying to replace let's say your, designer or your editor or whatever. Like, oh, I want a marketing agent that does all my podcast editing and sends it out there. The quality starts to go down at the moment. You can start to tweak it or whatever, but that human touch of doing things yourself is still so important. And I don't know where the exponential curve goes. Where's it? Are we hitting that peak where we're starting to see like, okay, this is as far as we can take it. There's certain tweaks you can do, but again, you're going to have to get in there. You're going to have to create your own copy. You're going to have to talk to people. You're still going to have to do these things because people are going to be inundated with AI slop and noise. And so these agents that are going out and doing these tasks for you, they're doing it for everybody else. So that, again, that high tide that raises all boats type of thing, you're going to have to separate yourself from doing these tasks that interact with people. Sure, it's your internal tasks that I'm doing. It helps, but yeah, it's it's an interesting thing that we're seeing with those AI agents.
I think one of the constant questions on my mind is the agency of the agent. How much agency does it have, and how far can it go, and when are we going to start seeing decisions with a high risk being made on behalf of humans, and what are the implications of that? But I guess that's a it's a much of a longer discussion. More about what you were saying, though. You were speaking about using AI tools. You gave a number of examples. You spoke about authenticity and the importance of bringing in the human element. Is there a value around the process that someone goes through, the struggle in itself? So let's take an example around writing a book.
Mhm.
So maybe you can use AI to help you write a book. Maybe it just looks at your previous writings and rewrites a book on a new topic, and it sounds just like you. So I guess my question is more around the value of the struggle, the value of the process for the person. Do we lose that? Is there value of me learning how to ride a bike or write a book and struggling to do it, and how it affects my brain, my sense of meaning in life, that I would lose not doing it myself and not building that skill myself, versus outsourcing the process and getting an output that I can perhaps edit and change and tweak? What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, no, that's a very interesting point, because all the brain studies now are showing that people are getting dumber by by using AI because of that very fact. And yeah, from telling my kids and like, oh yeah, go ahead and use AI for everything. They are losing that it's almost like the phones, where it's like you have to have silence, you have to have that where you're not distracted all the time, so you can just have that thinking, that deep thinking happen in those moments. And so is AI taking that away? I think it is, for sure. I try to tell my kids, and it's like, practice what you preach. Like, hey, don't use this for absolutely everything. Like, really think about these things, because maybe there's something in history, for example, where it's like, well, I don't need to know what happened in 1700s. Who cares? Like, I could just Google search that now. So why not have AI help me? I'm like, well, there might be something in the fact that you find interesting, and we're pattern recognizers. And so when you want to be creative, and that's kind of where AI is not going to be, in a sense of, we still have that creative thinking to be innovative, and connecting those patterns and dots that help you think outside the box is something that, if you're always having AI do a lot of the work for you, you may miss out on that. And it's interesting, because I have ideas for books, and I love reading kind of like the lit RPG kind of things. They're like kind of fantasy and sci-fi, and it just, for me, expands my mind when I read a lot of sci-fi books and things. And so I have stories in my head that I've wanted to write, and I actually used AI to, like, I conversed with it. I said, this is my character. I have all these ideas, and then it spit out interesting things where I can go back and forth with it, and it refines it. Did I do anything with it? No. Is the satisfaction there? Probably, versus me writing it from all scratch, but then, it writing 80% of it, versus, if you went with like an editor or somebody else who would help you write it. Me not going through that process, it's hard to say, but I can see that the satisfaction. I mean, it's just like anything. Like, if you struggle to do something and you come out at the end, the satisfaction and what you learn is far more valuable than if it was kind of easy for you and you came out with something that is, almost close, but maybe not as maybe didn't take as much deep thinking about it.
Mm-hmm. 100%. And I think it's a very common response to the question around what's your proudest accomplishment. And it's typically people speaking about a time where they struggled with something. We were working on this project, COVID hit, and everything changed, and we needed to pivot. We worked together, and at the end, we were able to resolve it. But it's always around the struggle and the process. And I think we ought to ask ourselves the question around what aspects of our lives do we want to automate? Imagine if parenting can be automated. Would you want to miss out on that? Some people might say parenting is difficult, but I would think that a lot of the parents out there would never give it up, because it's still very satisfying, and it's an experience worth living than using a parenting AI agent to help you in the future.
You're 100% right with that. It's always, you feel like nature has made things tough. Having a baby is very tough for that very reason. So you value it. When you give your kids something for free, this is like, whatever. Oh, those were $200 shoes. You just ran in the mud with them. But it's like, oh, okay, whatever. But if they had to earn that money to get it, oh, they make sure that stuff is clean. And so,
Absolutely, absolutely.
yeah,
So my worry, I guess, is with what are some of the things that we're seeing is that value, like you said, is lost. That premium on the experience and on the struggle, and of course, what you mentioned on the impact on our brains as well, and how we think of things.
yeah, I think it's an important point there because we know from our just being designers now, UX designers, are things getting commoditized for us.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the problem where they don't understand like the thought process that goes into something and the our expertise. Yeah, you could go to Dribble, you could go to whatever and just try to like vibe code your way into something. Now it's like it feels like a lot of executives who aren't privy to good design and what that looks like, they just think it's just a commodity. So just give me pretty wireframes, just give me this, and you could just vibe code it on Lovable or whatever, and then that's it. That's good enough for me. It's like no, that's not, good people who create great results. That's you can't do that, and you can't think that way. And so it's like that struggle of when something's given fast and cheap for somebody else, then that our skills and our expertise is diminished.
And I wish there was a way that we can link the ROI around elements of authenticity, elements of good design, and the impact and the risk, and maybe tie them back to revenue goals, because I think that's what's going to get some of the attention. From a consumer perspective, a lot of people just see this overflow, like you mentioned, of AI slop content
Mm-hmm.
everywhere. How can we quantify objectively that premium on authenticity around or the human aspect in experiences moving forward? I guess it's a good segue for me to ask you, given your long experience in the field of design, if you could wish for anything in the professional field of design, what would it be and why?
Yeah, this is something that I'm seeing where when tech becomes a big focus, companies, back then in the dot-com era, they were very feature focused, feature centric. And so what came out of that is, Apple focusing on like user centric design and being that kind of organization and showing the importance of that. But now with AI, I feel like it's almost reverting back again to being feature centric. And so whenever I see this in a lot of organizations where design is under the CTO, and it's then we become executors of requirements. Designers need to be strategic partners in the business decision, so we need to have that seat at the table and not be an afterthought. And I feel like we were making great progress, and now we're kind of being put back into that position. So that's one of my wishes. And I think, that user research has to become a fundamental in product development as your financial planning, because if you're going to, like we just said, if you want metrics to help you decide on data-driven decisions. Obviously, if you're building something brand new and innovative, you don't have those metrics just yet. But I don't know how many times where I've just pushed clients saying, we have to do the studies after the fact, after we launch. Let's figure out what the metrics are. Even if it's enterprise software and you sold it to a client, you still want to do those things. And it just seems to be pushed aside because it can be somewhat time consuming, but it's so important. But again, it's just the maturity level of organizations. And I think being cross-functional and that collaboration within organizations, I want that to be the default, not the exception. And by understanding what everybody's goals are, how it aligns to things, it just makes communication throughout an organization better. And in the end, you're just going to have a better product. And yeah, I think, having that seat at the table, having more research be a part of things. I think those are like some of the big things that I see that wave starting to move against us again. We just as designers have to like stand up and say, no, we have to be strategic. And we have to think about this because, yeah, your competitors are doing all this as well, and they're moving just as fast, or if not faster. So we have to be looking at what problems we're solving and how good are we solving it.
I agree. And I think once the negative impacts of not doing so become much more apparent and real and quantified, then I think organizations might listen. So from here, I really want to ask you around a specific cause or topic or issue that you're passionate about and you'd like to share with our audience today?
Yeah, I think I broached it on the subject earlier, but I have 3 children. I see the effect of tech that has on them, and the social aspect of it. From Roblox, they're playing that, and the amount of potential predators that are there, to just being on your phones, not interacting with people. I'm always supporting organizations that are always like the exploitation and trying to like work against that. I mean, you just saw in the news with Roblox the other day where they're going against people who are finding these predators, which is just mind blowing. The fact that that's happening and they're allowing for it. So I'm always talking with my children about technology and asking them questions and looking at, and watching them play, and actually trying to play these games with them, just so I can have a better communication through that, versus just saying, "Hey, get off the iPad after 30 minutes." No, like, "Hey, let me see what you're doing. What's the role of this game? What is this person doing over here?" So I have an understanding. But I also don't want to be just like a parent, like, this is the rule, that's it. Because I actually asked my daughter the other day, I'm like, "Hey, are you using the chat GPT, and how are you using it?" She goes, "Oh, we created these like stories with a twist, and each one of us comes up with a different story. We tell it in relationship to a certain character that we pick, and AI kind of helps us, and we pretend certain things." And I'm like, "That's really interesting." And we homeschooled our kids for a good amount of time. Now they're in public school, but I've always told my kids, it's important for you to, when we go out, I want you to order food. I want you to talk to people. I want you to greet people that come over to our house, say hi, do these things that a lot of kids nowadays, they're just so, their communication skills are so bad. And so, I think as a parent, always being on top of the tech that they're downloading to their phone, and being, not just being harsh on the rules, but you have a better, well, you get more bees with honey than vinegar. So having that approach to tech, because it's moving so fast, because the social aspect of the apps and how kids are using it. I mean, geez, it's being in tech, it's moving so fast, and being on top of that and seeing how they're interacting with it, it's hard for us to even keep up with that. And so, I think, like you said, the whole conversation around ethics and social part of it, these companies, they don't care. They want kids using it. They want that addiction. They want that dopamine. So the only thing you can do is teach them, like, "Hey, this is what's happening." And so just be aware of that. And yeah, that's kind of where I would love to be a part of these applications, these companies that are really trying to help educate. They're trying to find people that are trying to exploit kids, and really try to like get involved with that at some time in my career.
Thank you for sharing. For those interested in learning more about your work and connecting with you, how can they reach out?
Yeah, you could find me on LinkedIn. You could check out our podcast, Make an Impact Podcast. And if you go to certain industry conferences or whatever, it'd be great. But yeah, check out our website at impact.io and reach out to me. Love to hear your challenges or stories, or even if you have questions just from a UX design perspective. I'm happy to give you some mentorship advice as well.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing. And if you were to ask our next guest a question, what would that question be?
Oh, that's a good one.
I understand it's with little context.
I think, you almost stumped me on this one. I'm trying to think what. Yeah, I mean, especially if they're around, I'm trying to think of something that's different than what you've asked me. But I would love to hear and see, what are they doing to prepare themselves for this AI future? Because I feel like there's so many different directions that I've been overwhelmed for this entire year, just trying to learn everything. And at a certain point, I'm just like, okay, you can't just go to one thing, jump to another and another, which is what I've been doing. And I'm like, okay, I'm just going to focus on AI agents, or I'm going to focus on this tool and how it helps me write better copy, or whatever the case is. I think just understanding, what are they doing to prepare themselves for that future, and how do they feel about it?
All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Makoto, this conversation was wholesome, insightful, and valuable. And I want to say thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on the Product People podcast.
Thank you for having me. This has been great.
I want to express my gratitude to all our listeners. Your support means the world to me. If you found today's episode valuable, please hit subscribe, leave a review, or share this podcast with your friends. I also encourage you to share your feedback and your ideas on what topics you'd like to hear about next on this podcast. Your input is very important as it helps me learn and improve. Stay tuned for more exciting episodes, and until next time, stay courageous, creative, and compassionate. Take care.